Well, hello, explorers of the digital frontier. I am the Crunchman, which you might know me better as Captain Crunch from the Blue Box days. Welcome back to my channel. I'm excited about today's adventure because we're about to embark on a journey deep into the heart of electronics. Be prepared, it's highly technical, and yes, there will be math involved. But for the uninitiated, the Blue Box was an early hacking tool, and I was there at the very forefront. But today, we're not reminiscing about the past. We're learning from it and pushing forward into the future, while at the same time experiencing the designs, but not like what we did in the past, where computers were barely available, but using some of the later hobbyist tools. But 35 years ago, that phone company eventually solved the problem. Besides that, there's no need for cheating the phone company anymore. After all, most phone calls these days are free, voice over IP. Because a long time ago, blue boxes were illegal. But 35 years ago, phone companies solved this problem. There is no known telecom switch that uses this ancient N1 signaling anymore. It's all gone over to SS7. I wrote an article on SS7 and published it in Steemit. I'll try to dig it up if I can. Perhaps you'll find it if you look around. Who knows? Before we dig in, let me warn you, things are about to get a bit technical. We'll be unearthing some incredibly potent tools, exploring their possibilities and creating something new along the way. From Bodhi plots to phase shift plots, this journey will challenge your skills and expand your electronic understanding, including programming and, yes, of course, math. I'll be utilizing some of my favorite tools, the Copilot AI tool on VS Code IDE, which I'm very excited about because it'll be the first time I'm going to play around with it. And then Jupyter Lab notebooks, where I'll be sharing code snippets and mathematical models. We'll also be referring to a bunch of schematic websites to make sure our concepts are solid. I will be wind up using a little bit of math. Yes, math. As a special bonus for all of you coding enthusiasts out there, I'll be writing a Blue Box app in React Native, and I'll release the source code on GitHub for all to see, study, and learn from. If you are a React Native developer and want to roll up your sleeves, you first have to join my Patreon page, patreon.com/JDCrunchTime. But that's not all. This adventure will be spawning a series of YouTube videos. I'll be interviewing engineers, programmers, and innovators who are there in the trenches of the digital frontier and those who are shaping its future. So, are you ready? Strap in and hold on tight, because the Crunchman is about to take you on a wild whirlwind tour of electronics like you've never seen before. As always, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Now let's talk a little bit about phone phreaking stuff. The magic frequency that phone phreaks used to use back in the day when they were using in-band signaling, or N1 as they called it, is 2600 hertz frequency. That's the main frequency in use. When a line, let's say from San Francisco to New York, is idle and not being used, each one of those lines will whistle into each other a 2600 hertz tone at each other. And with this tone, that is an indication that the trunk is not in use. It's a rather clever technology, if you ask me. Very clever that they use it that way. So if anything goes wrong with the trunk, like the line goes dead, first thing that happens, if the 2600 goes gone, pretty soon the phone company is going to activate a trouble card and the line will be identified. So did you know that it was in New Jersey back in 1951 that the first exchange implemented using direct long-distance dial capability? Quite a leap in telecom history. Only back as far as 1951. That's almost like yesterday. But even the mightiest people stumble. In this case, the audio line used by the AT&T system had its downsides. Great for us phone phreaks, but boy, if you're an AT&T executive, you're scratching your head saying, why did we design it this way? And if you want to put your answer down in the comments on why you think they did it that way, love to hear it from you. Going back now to phone phreaking, AT&T found itself playing a reactive game, sticking bandages on gaping wounds and, well, trying to beautify the unseemly. A system that they had implemented and designed through revolutionary had its share of vulnerabilities, and soon AT&T is grappling with more than just technical glitches. They were facing a PR nightmare. The design, as innovative as it was, had serious flaws, and these flaws were instantly noticed by well-educated MIT students, as well as other education facilities, who discovered that all one has to do is to send the 2600 stone down the phone line directly into the mouthpiece just after dialing a toll-free 800 number. By doing that, you're indicating that the line is free. It's nothing more than just hanging up the phone, as far as the trunk is concerned. Then by releasing the 2600 stone, you'll hear a little kercheep sound, a little kercheep. And that is an indication that the trunk is ready to receive multi-frequency tones into the phone, thus diverting the call to someone you want to call for free, instead of that 800 number that you called to get on the trunk to begin with, which was also free. And that is what showed up on the call tapes. At first, AT&T was keeping their proverbial fingers crossed in the hopes that flaws wouldn't be discovered. Well, wishful thinking. It didn't take them long to figure that out. I mean, come on. The idea soon came to being able to filter out the 2600 hertz tone, and in some exchanges, small exchanges, they were able to do that because the filtering equipment was very big and very expensive, and they could not afford to filter a huge 1A toll switching tandem. But they could filter a number one crossbar filter tandem relatively easy if they don't have too many lines. But the idea of filtering 2600 really wasn't very useful. But what they did do is they would put a filter on the line of a suspected phone freak. And when that person sent 2600 down the line, right then and there, a recording will start. And a recording will record the multi-frequency tones that the hacker sent down the line, which is a phone number that you call, and probably about the first maybe minute or so of the conversation before it would drop off. After all, they got to respect their privacy, right? So at first, AT&T was keeping their fingers pretty crossed. But as the loop became known, it wasn't just a technology curious who started to exploit it. Instead, it took some time before the ramifications were really understood. Imagine a few college students, perhaps not the wisest of the bunch, constructing their own blue boxes and boasting about their free call capabilities throughout the dormitories. It didn't take them long to target that individual, that he was able to make free phone calls. All it takes is getting one of those guys pissed off and to snitch on the person making the call. And the phone company people would come down. The telco security agents, of course, would take the blue box. They were pretty savvy at that point of what the blue box did. And eventually, this concept got spread out big time. But let's not forget our ingenious phone hackers who were always on the hunt for unique ways to generate these tones. Musicians in particular found themselves equipped with a secret weapon, their organ. These instruments would produce sounds that closely mimicked the necessary tones. Some even managed to pull it off with a pair of saxophones, overcoming the exchange after many failed attempts. After all, what is a musical disaster? It's when you're on your favorite organ and on your favorite music and your organ gives out. Anyway, as I find myself caught up in this saga and how the authorities discovered my involvement, well, that's a story for another day and another video. Stay tuned for that one as well. So now we're getting to the point now where I'm going to talk a little bit about electronics and how these filters were made and why they were used, because these are the key components of a phone freak's arsenal of equipment. Most of this stuff was built by hand using components you got down at your Fry's Electronics or your favorite computer store. All of this stuff is common off-the-shelf stuff. And I'm going to demonstrate and show a little bit about how you can compute and analyze a frequency range, and also show the schematic diagram of the filter that you would use to make and create this filter. And that's in the next section, so stay tuned for that. Thank you. And of course, don't forget, you should be able to both subscribe, like, and press that bell icon so that you will be notified when further YouTube videos are available. Like always, I will put these videos up on Vimeo, and you can access it through my Patreon page. After all the work that I do, I gotta get paid something for my efforts, right? So please subscribe to my Patreon at patreon.com/JD Crunch Time. And as a subscriber, you will be getting early access to all of the videos that I put up, but some of these videos will not be put up on YouTube, not for a while. So if you want to watch them, you should join and subscribe to my Patreon and get the ball rolling to join me in any future episodes of Crunch Time TV. Okay, I am here with Chris, one of the programmers from this uh, great programming thing called Cyber Cowboys. Yay! Around rodeo them in, rope them in. Okay, so getting back now, what I want to do here at this point is I want to show you a little bit about how I'm able to create a filter, because one of the things that I really am adamant about is when I'm developing blue box applications, I have to run them through filters in order to get out all of the external sounds that are in there. And a filter is one of the best ways to do that. And the phone company uses filters all the time. So if I'm developing filters along with the phone company developing filters, I can filter out the filters, so to speak. It's sort of like a filter war with the phone company. What can I say? All right, so going back over that now, I'm going to share my screen here. And here we have got a Jupyter Notebook file showing all of the formulas needed in order to make calculations on a 6-pole filter, where I have 2 poles per each bandpass filter. So basically, I've got the high pass going into the operational amplifier, which is an amplification system, and then I have the low pass. So the high pass is always determined by but the frequency is equal to 1 over 2 pi times R times C. That's the formula. Okay, it doesn't matter how they're used in the formula. If these op-amp changes block 3 of 1, 2, and 3, they're cascaded. And as they get cascaded, you are able to create a really good thing here. How do we get rid of that? There we go. Good. Bye-bye. Okay. So in order to do that, first thing we have to do is we're using a lot of symbolic stuff here, because this is a mathematical thing. Remember, I warned you people in the earlier video that there's going to be math involved. Yay. So learn your math, kids. Study hard, because you're definitely going to use this stuff. So first what we do is we're having basically 6 symbols in our formula. We've got R1 and R2, F1 and F2, C1 and C2. And we're now converting these SMP into symbols called R1, R2, F1, F2, C1, and C2. And we're going to be using these throughout the thing. So first of all, we have F, and we are basically calculating, and we're going to solve for R1 in the formula. So in other words, you have 1 over 2 times pi times R1 times Z1, but R1 is in the denominator of that function. And so what you're able to do here is you're able to use this solve function, the SMP.solve function, to solve for F1 in the formula 1 over 2 times pi times R times C, okay? But we're solving for F1. Actually, we're solving for R1, I'm sorry. We're solving for R1, but R1 is in here, inside this formula. So when we solve for R1 inside this formula, this is how it's done. You basically do the SMP.solve right here. That's the formula that you're using. And then you're solving that. And your solution is R1, which is a solution. And given F1 and given F2, you're able to solve, you're able to get the F1 solution and the R1 solution and the R2 solution. We also need to calculate the capacitors. The capacitors are the same. We're always going to use 0.0047 and 0.001. A lot of times when you're designing circuits, you're always dealing with, sometimes you're dealing with resistance and you're dealing with capacitance. Always, if you can, keep your capacitance values fixed to a standard value. It's much, much better to calculate for R than it is to calculate for C, because R resistance values, you can get resistors at a 1% tolerance if you want to. Normally, resistors of the standard value go between 5, 10, and 20%. Okay, that's the tolerance. Capacitors are always usually 5 and 10%, and they're always standard values, like a 0.0047. That's a standard value of a resistor, a capacitor, and the same thing with C2. 0.0047 And you can get these in many different forms, okay? But the form that you use for capacitors is also very critical if you're using higher frequencies. But for audio frequencies, you pretty much can use any kind of capacitor and it should work fine. So R1 and C1 determine start, R2 and C2 at the end. So this is it, R1 and R2. And so you got F1 and F2, and we got C1 and C2. These are all given values. And we are then calculating basically the formulas to solve for R1 and R2. So the R1 and R2 that we're going to be using, and it's all going to be fixed throughout the whole thing. We're not going to change it. It's going to be 53K and 10.5 to 82K. Obviously, we're probably not going to use that exact value. We're probably going to be using either a 47K or a 52K. Those are standards. And a 10K is also a standard resistance value. Okay, now let's go down and do some math. So what we're doing now is we're calculating and we're using the Butterworth and we're using the FREQZ. And now this part here was I actually had to admit I did not know how to do this, and I actually had to ask ChatGPT to give me this cell. It obediently did it, but it did it wrong. I corrected it. I went back and says, you got to do it. I'm getting an error. And it said, oh, I'm sorry. You got to do this first. Okay. And it did this first. And it came back with, I think it took me 3 iterations with ChatGPT to come up with code that worked. Okay. So here we are. We have the 2 frequencies, F1 and F2. We're going from 200 hertz to 3200 hertz, a band pass filter. We're using a 8,000 value for the sample rate. Now, sample rate is normally not used in a formula like this, but you're going to be using it to normalize the frequency of F1 norm and F2 norm. And that's what the sample rate is for, FS, sample rate. Okay, that's normalized with an 8K sample rate. We have to generate the coefficients for the 6-order Butterworth bandpass filter. Okay, this is again a formula that was imported up here from SciPy.signal, and it's imported butter here. The butter stands for the Butterworth. There are 2 kinds of filters involved when you're dealing with bandpass filters. You're dealing with a Butterworth filter, which has got a much more consistent phase shift over the frequency range that you're calculating. If you use a Chebyshev filter, the Chebyshev filter's got a very sharp, steep end like this, but then it's got a ripple at the top, and it goes down, goes up like this, goes up like this, ripple at the top, and then down. But the slope of the side going up like this is very, very sharp. The Butterworth is not so sharp, but you got less phase shifting that you have to deal with. Okay, and I'm very sensitive about phase shifting, so I always want to use the Butterworth type of a thing. So with that, you compute with the F1 norm and the F2 norm, and the bandwidth type is a bandwidth, and you create B and A. Those are the coefficients of the 6-order Butterworth filter. You have to generate the frequency response of the filter. The WH is the frequency response of B and A with a WORN equal 2000. Whatever that is, I'm not sure. Like I said, ChatGPT generated. So I could probably ask ChatGPT to evaluate and tell me more about what that means. So then we create the Bode plot. We use the PLT function. The PLT function is from matplotlib up here. You import matplotlib.py plot or plotter as PLT. That's the thing that will plot you the graph. So we have a figure, and then we do the plot, and you're computing the FS, and you're doing the plot with the order of 6. Okay, again, this was generated by ChatGPT, and I'm a little bit confused. Like I said, man, math is my weak spot. But if you want to go over it, you can. I will provide you the source code in the bottom of the description of the actual code. So you create a value. This is a frequency in hertz, and we create the X value and the Y value. X value is all going along the frequency. That's the bottom here, frequency here. And the Y value is your gain. Your gain is just at a gain of 1. So we're just calculating, normalizing the gain at 1. Okay. Then you want a grid, and then you want to create the best fit. Create the Bode magnitude plot, and you create the phase plot. And then you show, and here's the magnitude plot with order 6. See, it's got a fairly sharp, steep curve, and it peaks out at, now the way they calculate the edges of the bandwidth here is 0.707. That is 1 over the square root of 2. And the reason for that is that's what is called a midpoint. And it's just by definition and by standard. So it's slightly below here is 0.707. Okay. And here's the line right here, 707. That's the line. And so this point right here is the beginning frequency, which is 300 hertz. And this is the ending frequency here of roughly about 3,200 hertz. Now, this is the band pass of a standard old phone circuit, okay? The dash, dash, dash here is the square root of 0.5. What I said before was 1 over the square root of 2. Okay, so down here is the phase shift, and you can see it's a fairly consistent phase shift. It starts way up here, and it gradually goes down a nice smooth phase curve like this. And you're going to want it that way, okay? Later on, I wanted to calculate again, but this time I wanted to calculate with the graphing a little bit differently now. I wanted to graph it like from 2,000 hertz to 3,200 hertz. The reason why I wanted to take the endpoint, I want to magnify it out a little bit more so that I get an exact calculation of where the end frequency and where it drops off at. And it drops off because it's an order of 6. And this is the phase shift. You can notice the phase is a good, nice, smooth phase curve. You want to have a phase curve that doesn't have any jagged jerks like that, because when you have jerky phase shift responses, your circuits are going to work unpredictably. So there you have got the math involved in calculating out a circuit and using these frequencies and these values, which are then put up into here, these values to create your actual band pass filter. And so there you have the actual Jupyter Notebook analysis, I guess you'd put it, of the thing. So I'm going to stop now the recording.
That's really cool.